I will do my best not to say, where do you get 1,000 plus columns in an Excel spreadsheet? CSV with 1,000 plus columns. Really, this is about external tables with 1,000 and more columns. Here's the question that came in. I know that an Oracle table can only have 1,000 columns. We have a CSV file that has more than 1,000 columns. Is it possible to query this as an external table? I will do my best not to say, where do you get 1,000 plus columns in an Excel spreadsheet? But it obviously exists out there. Too long didn't read? No, you can't. You cannot get more than 1,000 columns in an Oracle table, no matter what kind of table that is. But when it comes to external tables, we can maybe do a little bit of trickery, a little bit of magic to get someone close to what they want to achieve. I put demo here in quotes because when it comes to creating tables with 1,000 columns or more, having that in SQL Plus is just ridiculously long scripts. So I thought I'd do some screenshots first, and then now once we're familiar with what I'm going to talk about, then I'll do the real demo where things will scroll past very, very fast. Here's our Excel spreadsheet, and I've cut it down the middle because it's got, in this case, 1,200 columns. And to keep it nice and simple, you can see column 1 has the value of 1, column B or column 2 has the value of 2. All the way out, I did 1,200 columns here. And see, what was it? Column ATD has the value 1,200. So it's a CSV file, just one row to keep it simple, 1,200 columns in the Excel spreadsheet, which then became a 1,200 column CSV file. If I try do this, a normal external table, which is create my external table, here's my 1,200 columns that I want to get as a result. Here's my 1,200 columns defined as the mapping inside the external table definition, much like a SQL loader control file. As you would expect, it says, I'm sorry, you're asking for 1,200 columns and you don't get them. You don't have to have those two parts of the definition in alignment, just like you would in a SQL loader control file. So I can do something like this. Create table T. I want just columns C1 and C2. But in the lower part of the definition, I can still have those 1,200 data elements that are coming from the CSV file. So only 2 columns in orange and 1,200 columns coming as the mapping information coming from the CSV file in green. That's totally legitimate. So now I can query columns C1 and C2. At which point you think, well, that doesn't really get me close to where I want to be. But if I can do that, I could look at something like this. Create table T first 1,000 columns, which has the values C1 to C1000, and then the full 1,200 column mapping in the external table definition. Then a second table, which is the remaining columns, starting at column C1001 up to C1200, and once again, the full 1,200 columns in the data mapping. They're both valid. And then I can do a query which has some sort of sensible join condition. So I need some definition of what a primary key would be for those rows. It might just be the first column, or I could maybe use row num, etc. But I can actually get more than 1,000 columns in a result of a query. I just can't have 1,000 columns in a table. So in this case, I could actually join those two tables, select T1 star, T2 star, and get a 1,200 column result, even though I can't have a 1,200 column table. That's the theory that you should be able to potentially work around this. Let's now look at the real demo where we can fly through some of these scripts and see what the implications are. So as I said, things are going to scroll through here a lot. So here's create table T1. It's got the first 11 columns, and then there's the whole 1,000 columns. So there's the first 1,000 columns in my T1 table. Here's the start of my 1,200 column definition. There's C1, C2 up to C5, all the way up to C1200. And that creates fine. That's a table T1 that gives me the first 1,000 columns. Create table T2. It starts at C1001. And I'm only just picking the last five columns here just because you understand that I would go to 1,200 columns here. The columns 1,000 to 1,200, and the same full 1,200 definitions in there. And so I have T1, the first 1,000 columns, T2, the next 200 columns. I just grabbed a few. Let's see if I can actually do this join. I've left out any join condition here because we saw from the Excel spreadsheet, there's only one row in this thing. Normally, you would have a join condition to make sure the rows obviously don't do a Cartesian join, but this is a nice simple one row example. If we run it, it works. you can actually see the data coming up. It starts at column number 1 and goes all the way up to column 1005 in this particular case, because I only put 5 columns in the second table, but there's more than 1,000 columns there. There you go. You can actually query a external table with more than 1,000 columns of data and get the results out. But there are some things to be aware of here. What happens if I try to think, yep, I'm happy with that query, that's great, let's try put it in a view. You can't do it. A view can't have 1,000 columns just like a table. So even though that query runs fine, I can't put it in a view. Because I can't put it in a view, you might be thinking that's going to introduce even more implications, and it does. What if I just do a with statement? I just want to create the view like as effectively a temporary thing. So I just put it in a with statement. I'm not creating any database dictionary objects now. I'm just doing a with statement. Same problem. Even like that, you cannot refer to this thing with more than 1,000 columns. In fact, I can't even just use like that. I can't even nest this as a subquery or an inline view. Same problem. So yes, you can get around this problem, but there are some implications and some limitations, obviously. What I say with this thing is yes, we have a workaround for you. You get this, this join between 2 tables with lots and lots of columns, but you really are heading into what I call pioneer territory. You never want to be a pioneer when it comes to technology, because the pioneers are generally the people that encountered the enemies, got slaughtered. They became a lesson to others, and it's one of those things where I can be pretty confident that inside the Oracle testing area, there isn't a huge number of test cases that we are writing to check out what happens when you have more than 1,000 columns in a result set coming from 2 external tables which are joined together. It's a very niche requirement. So I would be looking at revisiting why you have an S and CSV file with that many columns in it. Maybe it's just a case of reviewing the data. It seems to be very strange to have over 1,000 data elements for a particular attribute. It just seems very odd to me. So be aware of that. Once you start heading to this kind of territory, you're sort of a bit on your own. It's unlikely that other people have been here before you, and unlikely that the bugs have been discovered because it's such a niche case. I will say, I tested these up to 10,000 columns in the external table definition. I got bored after that. So you can create a table with up to 1,000 columns where it has to sift through over or up to 10,000 elements defined in the data mapping. And that worked fine. So be aware it can be done. And also, if you're on Autonomous, we load external tables using the DBMS Cloud package. That's all supported there as well. So using DBMS Cloud, I did a demo here, same test. My field list had all 1,500 columns, C1 up to C1500, and my column list just had the columns of interest. So even though we're using a package DBMS Cloud Create External Table, the API supports that same process of having less columns in the table and more columns in the external table definition. So that works fine as well.